The satellite feed cut to static at 3:47 hours, and in that moment, 12 men knew they were going to die. The ops room at Bagram fell silent except for the hum of cooling fans and someone's shallow breathing. Major Kendrick stared at the blank screen where moments before he'd watched SEAL Team 6's vital signs flatline one by one. Not dead, just gone, swallowed by the Hindu Kush like so many others. The mission had been clean on paper. Extract a CIA asset from a compound 15 clicks inside Pakistani airspace. Get out before dawn. But the Taliban had been waiting. Somehow they knew. Now 12 of America's most elite warriors were pinned in a dried riverbed, taking fire from 3 sides, and every quick reaction force was either grounded by weather or too far out to matter. Kendrick's hand hovered over the phone that connected directly to JSOC. He'd have to make the call soon. The call that ended careers and started congressional investigations. The call that meant admitting he'd sent men to die in a place that officially didn't exist. Outside, the wind howled across the tarmac, keeping the Apache grounded, keeping the AC-130 circling uselessly above the weather. Someone had to go. Someone had to punch through that storm. The ready room was empty except for one pilot. She sat in the corner, her flight suit faded and stained with hydraulic fluid, reading a paperback western with pages so worn they'd gone soft as cloth. Captain Vera Kyan. Everyone called her Warden. Not because she was strict, she barely spoke to anyone, but because she'd once told a reporter that the A-10 Thunderbolt wasn't an aircraft. It was a flying prison cell for anything stupid enough to be on the ground when she showed up. The quote had gone viral, been printed on t-shirts, made her briefly famous. But that was 6 years ago. Now she was 41, considered ancient by fighter pilot standards, and flying the one plane nobody wanted. A slow, ugly, outdated monster that the Air Force had been trying to retire since before she was born. She'd flown 211 combat missions, more than anyone currently in theater, more than most pilots flew in their entire careers, and she'd never lost anyone. Not one forward air controller, not one grunt on the ground, not one mission. But tonight nobody thought to call her. The A-10 couldn't fly in this weather, everyone knew that. It was too slow, too vulnerable, too old. The mission required speed and stealth and technology, not a 40-year-old airplane held together with speed tape and stubbornness. Kendrick was reaching for the phone when the operations sergeant, a calm-voiced woman named Tors, said quietly, "Sir, Warden's spinning up." He turned. "What?" "Captain Kyan. She's pre-flighting Hog 27. Says she heard the situation on guard frequency." Kendrick felt something cold slide down his spine. "Tell her to stand down. The weather, she says she's going, sir, with or without clearance." For a long moment nobody moved. Then Kendrick looked at the blank satellite feed, thought about 12 men in a riverbed, and nodded once. Tors keyed her mic. "Warden, you are cleared hot. Godspeed." The A-10 Thunderbolt was never beautiful. While other aircraft gleamed and swooped and cut through air like blades, the Warthog squatted on the ramp like a pissed-off bullfrog, its nose painted to resemble teeth, its twin engines mounted high to keep them away from debris, its entire airframe built around a 30mm cannon so massive that technically the plane was just a support structure for the gun. Hog 27 was older than most of the pilots who flew her. Her titanium bathtub cockpit was scarred from shrapnel and small arms fire, her belly stained dark from gun smoke and exhaust, her wings patched and repatched until maintenance crews joked that she was 10% original metal and 90% stubbornness. Vera walked her pre-flight in the darkness, her flashlight beam finding every rivet and panel and tire. She touched the plane the way some people touched religious icons, fingers brushing metal that had carried her through flak and fire, and every kind of hell the ground could throw upward. The crew chief, a kid named Dalton who couldn't have been more than 22, watched her nervously. "Ma'am, weather's reporting 0-0 conditions above 8,000 feet, icing, turbulence, visibility under a quarter mile." Vera didn't look up from inspecting the landing gear. They're saying it's suicide, ma'am, even for the Hog." Now she did look at him. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, and they'd seen things that made young crew chiefs flinch. Dalton, how many men are dying right now? Ma'am, 12. 12 men are dying right now because everyone thinks their fancy jets are too precious to risk in bad weather. She patted the A-10's scarred nose. This girl was built to get dirty, arm her up, full combat load, and give me white phosphorus on stations 3 and 7. Dalton's eyes widened. Willie Pete, ma'am, that's against the Geneva Convention if I use it against personnel. I know I'm not planning to. She climbed into the cockpit, settling into the ejection seat that had been molded to her body by 200 missions. I'm going to use it so those SEALs can see where I am when I come in, because it's going to be dark, and it's going to be hell, and I need them to know I'm there. The engine start sequence on an A-10 sounded like a garbage disposal eating rocks. Vera ran through her checklist with the mechanical precision of someone who could do it in her sleep, probably had done it in her sleep during the dreams that still came sometimes. Weapons armed, countermeasures loaded, chaff and flare pods full. The HUD glowed green in the darkness, displaying a world of threat indicators and targeting systems and information she'd long ago learned to process without conscious thought. The radio crackled. Warden, Bagram Tower. Weather update shows conditions deteriorating. Recommend abort. Bagram, Warden. Negative. 12 precious American souls are having a much worse night than me. I'm rolling. She released the brakes and felt the hog lurch forward, heavy with ordnance, eager despite its age. The runway lights stretched ahead like a path to another world. At the ops center, Kendrick watched the infrared feed as the ugly aircraft accelerated, slower than any modern fighter, slower than it had any right to be, and somehow that slowness made it seem more determined, more inevitable. She's actually doing it, someone whispered. Torres crossed herself. That woman's either the bravest pilot I've ever seen or the craziest. Kendrick watched the A-10 lift off, watched it disappear into clouds so thick they looked solid. Probably both, he said quietly. The storm hit her at 4,000 feet like a physical thing. The A-10 bucked and shuddered, rain hammering the canopy so hard Vera couldn't see her own wings. Ice formed on the leading edges. Wind shear tried to flip her. Lightning turned the clouds purple and white. She flew on instruments alone, trusting numbers on screens more than her own senses, trusting the airplane that had never let her down. Warden, Bagram, we're showing severe turbulence in your sector. What's your status? Her voice came back steady. Bagram, Warden, status is bumpy, still flying. She didn't mention that she'd lost 200 feet of altitude in a downdraft that felt like the hand of God. Didn't mention that ice was forming on her canopy or that her right engine temperature was fluctuating. The SEALs didn't need to know their rescue was dancing with physics at the edge of catastrophe. At the compound, Senior Chief Marcus Hale pressed himself into mud that smelled like death and centuries. The man next to him, a kid named Garrett, was bleeding from somewhere in his leg, trying not to scream. 12 men in a space barely 20 meters across. PKM machine gun fire chewing the walls apart. RPGs sailing overhead so close Hale could feel the heat. Chief, we gotta move, someone said. Move where, genius, there's 100 fighters out there. Then we're dead. Not yet. Hale keyed his radio knowing it probably wouldn't reach anyone, knowing it didn't matter. Any station, this is Kodiak 26, taking effective fire from multiple positions. 4 wounded, need immediate air support or extract, will not survive until dawn. Static answered him, then a voice, female, calm as Sunday morning. Kodiak 26, this is Warden. I'm 20 mics out. Hold what you've got. Help is coming. Hale stared at his radio like it had spoken in tongues. Warden, what the fuck is a warden? The JTAC Joint Terminal Attack Controller, a lieutenant named Chen who'd been with SEALs long enough to earn their respect, smiled through blood-caked teeth. That's Kyan, Vera Kyan, the lady who flies the hog. Another SEAL, Carlson Preacher, laughed without humor. They sent us an A-10. We need fast movers, not a goddamn museum piece. But Hale was listening to the radio, listening to that voice. He'd heard enough pilots to know the difference between someone reading a script and someone who meant every word. This one meant it. Listen up, he said. We hold, we survive, and we let the lady work. Vera descended through 11,000 feet and broke through the bottom of the storm into visibility that was barely better. Moonlight filtered through running clouds. Below, the mountains looked like the bones of dead gods, jagged and cruel and endless. Her targeting pod came online, infrared painting the world in shades of green and white. She could see the compound now, see the muzzle flashes, see how thoroughly surrounded the SEALs were. Kodiak Warden, I have visual on your position. Light up targets with IR strobes and get small. Danger close is about to get very close. Warden Kodiak, negative on the strobes. We're in the open, they'll draw fire. Chief, I need to know where you are. A pause, then Hale's voice resigned. We're the 12 guys in the riverbed who are about to die unless you're everything they say you are. Vera smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Chief, I'm better. She rolled the A-10 inverted and dove. The Warthog wasn't supposed to be aerobatic. It was too heavy, too slow, too much like a tank with wings. But Vera had learned long ago that supposed to didn't mean shit when people were dying. She came in from the north, low enough that her wheels almost touched the highest ridgeline, and she lit up the night with white phosphorus rockets that turned the mountainside into daylight. The Taliban fighters who'd been closing in for the kill suddenly found themselves backlit and exposed. And that's when Vera opened up with the gun. The GAU-8 Avenger was obscene. 7 barrels, 30mm depleted uranium shells, 4,000 rounds per minute. When it fired, it sounded like God ripping a phone book in half. The recoil was so powerful it actually slowed the aircraft down. Vera walked fire across the ridgeline, watched human bodies come apart like paper, watched machine gun positions explode, watched the Taliban's careful ambush turn into chaos and fire and death from above. Kodiak, targets North Ridge are neutralized. Give me your next priority. Hale's voice came back shaking. Not from fear. From relief so intense it was almost painful. Warden, you beautiful goddamn angel, we've got RPG positions on the eastern slope. They're keeping us pinned. Copy. Coming around. She pulled the hog through a turn so tight her vision grayed at the edges, lined up on the coordinates and fired again. 30 seconds of continuous fire. When she pulled up, the eastern slope was a crater. In the ops center at Bagram, the satellite feed had come back online. Everyone stood frozen, watching thermal imagery of an A-10 doing things A-10s weren't supposed to do. Tight turns, high-G maneuvers, flying so low in the mountains that radar kept losing her. And that gun, Jesus Christ, that gun, she's flying like a fighter, someone said. Tors shook her head slowly. No, she's flying like someone who gives a damn. Kendrick was on the phone with JSOC now, explaining why he'd authorized a solo penetration into Pakistani airspace, explaining why the only thing between 12 SEALs and death was a 41-year-old woman in a plane older than she was. On the other end, a general was yelling. Kendrick pulled the phone away from his ear and watched Vera Kyan work. Sir, he said calmly, you can court-martial me tomorrow. Right now, watch this and tell me I was wrong. The general shut up. Everyone shut up. Because what they were watching was art. Deadly, precise, merciless art. Vera made another pass, then another. She fired until her gun ran low on ammunition. She dropped her entire load of Maverick missiles. She used every trick she'd learned in 211 missions, flying in the radar shadow of mountains, using clouds for concealment, popping up just long enough to fire and then disappearing again. And slowly, methodically, she killed every Taliban fighter who thought tonight would end with American blood. The compound fell silent except for the wounded moaning and the sound of distant secondary explosions. Hale rose cautiously from the riverbed, barely believing he was still alive. Around him, 11 other men did the same. Garrett, the one who'd been bleeding, gave a weak thumbs up. Warden Kodiak, area is secure. I don't know what to say. Vera's voice came back and she sounded tired. Don't say anything, Chief. Just get your boys to the extract point. You've got 15 minutes before reinforcements arrive. Where are you going? I'm Winchester, out of ammunition and low on fuel, heading home. Warden, Hale's voice cracked. Thank you. A long pause, then quietly, just doing my job, get home safe. She turned the hog north and climbed back into the storm. Behind her, 12 men who shouldn't have survived watched her lights disappear. Preacher, who'd called the A-10 a museum piece, was crying. Not ashamed, just overwhelmed. "I take it back," he whispered. "I take it all back." Vera flew home through weather that tried to kill her twice more. She flew through ice and lightning and winds that should have torn her wings off. She flew with fuel gauges bouncing on empty and warning lights screaming and her body aching from 3 hours of high-G maneuvers. But she flew, because that's what you did. You flew until you couldn't, and then you flew some more. When she finally broke through the clouds above Bagram, dawn was painting the sky purple and gold. The tower had cleared all traffic. They gave her priority landing. As she touched down, as the wheels kissed concrete, she heard something on the radio she'd never heard before. Applause. The entire ops center was clapping. Tors was crying. Kendrick was smiling for the first time in 6 months. And somewhere in the mountains, 12 men were loading into a Chinook that would take them home. Vera taxied to her spot, shut down the engines, and sat in silence for a long moment. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fatting. She was 41 years old. She hurt in places she'd forgotten about, and she'd just done what everyone said was impossible. Dalton, the crew chief, stood by her ladder as she climbed down. He was looking at the A-10 like it was a miracle. The plane was covered in carbon scoring from the gun. Panels were missing. There was a bullet hole through the vertical stabilizer. Ice still clung to the wings. "Ma'am," he said, "that was a lot of paperwork," Vera finished. She touched the hog's nose one more time. "Take care of her, Dalton. She earned it." She walked toward the ops center and people stepped aside, not from fear. From respect so profound it was almost holy. When she entered, Kendrick stood. "Captain Kyan, I need to debrief you." "Yes, sir. But first I need to ask, how did you do it? Everyone said it was impossible, the weather, the mountains, everything." Vera thought about all the years of people doubting her. The comments about her age, the whispers that she should retire, the jokes about the Warthog being obsolete. She smiled. "Sir, impossible is just someone else's opinion. And I never did care much for opinions." That night, while Vera slept the sleep of the dead, the story spread. Through Bagram, through JSOC, through the Pentagon, through Congress. The SEALs told anyone who'd listen. The cockpit footage went classified and then viral among those with clearance. Within a week, Vera Kyan became something she'd never wanted to be, famous. Within a month, she became something she'd never imagined, a symbol. And within a year, she became something the Air Force desperately needed. Proof that sometimes the old ways, the slow ways, the ways everyone wanted to retire, were exactly what saved lives. But that night, she just slept and dreamed of a sky that went on forever. She didn't know that 12 men she'd never met were sitting in a hospital at Ramstein, Germany, writing letters to her that would fill a wall. She didn't know that Senior Chief Hale was already planning to name his daughter after her. She didn't know that Preacher was having Warden tattooed over his heart. She didn't know that the Air Force brass, who'd spent a decade trying to kill the A-10 program, were suddenly reevaluating everything. She didn't know that a video of her landing, watched by millions, would make young girls believe they could fly. She just knew that she'd done her job, that 12 men were alive who shouldn't be, and that somewhere in Afghanistan, an ugly old airplane sat on a ramp, proud and scarred and undefeated. Tomorrow would bring medals and interviews and politicians wanting photos. But tonight there was just silence, the good kind, the kind that meant everyone made it home. Captain Vera Warden Kyan woke at noon to find her commanding officer standing outside her quarters with a strange expression. Colonel Davies was air cavalry, old school, a man who'd flown Apache in Iraq and carried himself like violence was a language he spoke fluently. "Ma'am," he said, and the fact that he called her ma'am when he outranked her told her everything. "Walk with me." They walked through the base in silence, past hangars where maintainers stopped working to watch her, past F-16 pilots who suddenly found reasons to slow down and nod, past Marines who usually ignored Air Force who now saluted crisply. "You know you violated about 14 different protocols last night," Davies said. "Yes, sir." "Crossed into Pakistani airspace without clearance. Engaged in offensive operations beyond our area of responsibility. Used white phosphorus in a way that'll make the lawyers nervous." "Yes, sir. And you saved 12 of our finest warriors from certain death." They stopped at the flight line looking at Hog 27. In daylight she looked even worse, bullet holes, carbon scoring, stress cracks. The A-10 is being retired, Davy said quietly. Has been for years. Everyone says it's too slow, too vulnerable, too old. I know, sir. Congress is threatening to cut the program. The F-35 lobby is pushing hard. They say we don't need close air support specialists anymore. They say drones can do it cheaper. Vera said nothing. And then you went and did what you did. Davies turned to face her. There's a full bird colonel on his way here from the Pentagon. Wants to ask you about last night. They're thinking about using you for recruitment, posters, videos, the whole thing. With respect, sir, I'd rather eat glass, he laughed. That's what I told them you'd say. He pulled out a folder, handed it to her. These came this morning, letters from every single one of those SEALs. One of them, the senior chief, wants to recommend you for the Medal of Honor. I told him it won't happen. What you did was classified and politically complicated. But he's trying anyway. Vera opened the folder, saw handwriting, saw words like angel and miracle and the reason I get to meet my daughter. Her eyes stung. I don't need medals, sir. I know, that's why you deserve them. Davies looked back at the A-10. The Air Force is afraid, Captain, afraid that people saw what you did, afraid that it proves we need these planes, afraid that it proves experience matters more than flash, afraid that a 41-year-old woman just made every fighter jock in the inventory look like a kid with a video game controller. Sir, they're going to offer you a promotion, training command, get you out of the cockpit, put you somewhere safe where you can't embarrass the new jets anymore. Vera felt something cold settle in her stomach. And if I refuse, then you stay here, keep flying missions, keep being the thing they want to retire but can't. He met her eyes. What do you want, Captain? She thought about the feel of the stick in her hand, the sound of the gun, the weight of knowing that men lived because she'd been there. I want to fly, sir, until they literally pry me out of the cockpit. Davies smiled. Then that's what you'll do. He walked away, then paused. For what it's worth, Kyan, I've been doing this for 27 years. I've seen a lot of pilots, some good, some great. But what you did last night, that was legendary. The Pentagon colonel arrived the next day with an entourage of public affairs officers and video equipment. They set up in a conference room and asked Vera to tell the story. She kept it brief, clinical, stripped of emotion. They looked disappointed. Captain, the colonel said, we need something inspiring, something that shows what our pilots can do. With respect, sir, I'm not a performer, I'm a pilot. We know that, we just need what? A soundbite, a video for recruitment. Sir, you want inspiration, talk to the SEALs who didn't die. I just did my job. The public affairs officers looked at each other. The colonel sighed. Captain Kyan, do you understand the political situation? The A-10 program is on life support. You just gave us ammunition to save it, but we need your cooperation. Vera stood. Sir, with respect, if the A-10 can only be saved by publicity stunts, it doesn't deserve to be saved. It should be saved because it works. Because it keeps people alive, because it does a job no other plane can do. That's actually a pretty good quote. Don't put it in your video, she left. The story leaked anyway. A pilot at Bagram had recorded the cockpit footage on his phone from the ops center screen. Low quality, shaky, but real. It went online. Within 48 hours, 12 million people had watched Vera Kyan pull an A-10 through maneuvers that should have been impossible, through weather that should have been fatal, through mountains that should have ripped her apart. Within a week, it was 30 million. The comments section filled with veterans who'd been saved by A-10s in Iraq and Afghanistan, with pilots praising her skill, with feminists celebrating a woman doing what men said couldn't be done, with gun enthusiasts losing their minds over the footage of the GAU-8 firing, and with young girls saying they wanted to be pilots. Vera didn't read the comments. She flew 3 more missions that week. Routine CAS, close air support. Nothing dramatic. But she flew them with the same precision, the same care, the same absolute refusal to let anyone down. On the 4th day, Senior Chief Hale showed up at Bagram. He'd taken leave from the hospital just to make the trip. They met in the chow hall, and he looked at her like she was something holy. Ma'am, I'm not good with words, but my team wanted me to tell you something. He handed her a photograph. 12 men still bandaged, some on crutches, standing together in Germany. They'd written on it, To Warden, you gave us tomorrow, we'll never forget. Vera stared at it, felt her throat close. Chief, you don't need to. Yes, ma'am, we do. He sat down across from her. You know what I was thinking that night, in that riverbed? I was thinking about my daughter, she's 4. I was thinking I'd never see her again, never hear her laugh, never teach her to ride a bike. His voice broke. And then you came out of the sky like something from a myth, and you fought for us like we mattered, like we were worth risking your life for. You were worth it. That's what I'm trying to say, ma'am. You didn't just save our lives. You saved every moment we'll ever have, every birthday, every Christmas, every time I hold my little girl. You saved all of that. Vera couldn't speak. The guys and me, we're going to tell this story for the rest of our lives. We're going to tell our kids and our grandkids. And when people ask us about heroes, we're going to tell them about a woman who flew through hell because it was the right thing to do. He stood, saluted. She returned it, and he left her sitting there with a photograph and tears running down her face. That night, Vera sat in her quarters and finally let herself feel it. The fear she'd pushed down, the exhaustion, the weight of knowing that if she'd been 1 second slower, 1 degree off, 12 families would be planning funerals. She looked at the photograph, at the faces of men she'd saved, at the words they'd written, and she understood something she'd never quite grasped before. It wasn't about the flying, it wasn't about the plane. It was about the invisible thread that connected her to every soldier on the ground, the promise that if they needed her, she'd come. No matter what, no matter the cost. That was what it meant to be a pilot, to be a wingman, to be someone who showed up when everyone else said it was impossible. She put the photograph on her wall. Next to it, she taped the letters from the SEALs, reminders, not of glory, but of responsibility, of the reason she woke up every morning and climbed into an old, ugly airplane that everyone wanted to forget. The next week, Congress held hearings on the A-10 program. The Air Force brass testified that it was obsolete, that modern warfare required speed and stealth, that the F-35 could do everything the Warthog did and more. They had charts, statistics, PowerPoint presentations that cost 6 figures, and then someone on the committee asked a simple question. Can an F-35 do what Captain Kyan did in Pakistan? Silence. Can it fly for 3 hours through extreme weather through mountains at night and provide sustained close air support with precision sufficient to save 12 men in a danger-close environment? More silence. Can it take damage and keep flying? Can it loiter for hours? Can it carry the weapon's load? Can it be repaired by a crew chief with hand tools in a forward operating base? A general cleared his throat. Congresswoman, the F-35 is a multi-role fighter with capabilities that answer the question. Can it do what Captain Kyan did? The general looked at his notes, looked at his colleagues. No, ma'am, not in that specific scenario. Then explain to me why we're retiring the plane that can. The hearing went another 2 hours, but in that moment something shifted. The A-10 wasn't saved that day, but its execution was postponed. And in Afghanistan, Vera Kyan kept flying. She never learned about the congressional hearing, never read the reports, never saw herself turned into a symbol for a dozen different causes. She just flew, mission after mission, month after month. And every time she came home, she looked at the photograph on her wall and remembered why. 1 month after the rescue, Preacher, the SEAL who'd called the A-10 a museum piece, showed up at Bagram with a gift. A titanium plaque engraved with the date and coordinates of the mission and the words, "Where angels feared to fly, the warden came." I don't know where to put this, Vera said. Put it in your cockpit, ma'am, right where you can see it. So on bad days you remember you're capable of miracles. She did. And on bad days when the missions blurred together and the exhaustion settled into her bones and she wondered why she was still doing this at her age, she looked at it, remembered, and kept flying. 6 months after the rescue, a young girl wrote to her. The letter came through official channels forwarded by Public Affairs, and it said, "Dear Captain Kyan, I'm 11. I watched the video. I want to fly like you. Can girls really do that?" Vera sat in her quarters and wrote back. Not the official, sanitized response the Air Force would have wanted, but the truth. "Dear friend, yes, girls can fly. But more important than flying is knowing why you fly. I fly because people need help and I can give it. I fly because a machine, properly used, can save lives. I fly because someone has to, and I'm good at it. If you want to be a pilot, work hard, study. Don't let anyone tell you you're too small, too weak, too anything. The sky doesn't care about any of that. It only cares if you're brave enough to claim it. Good luck. And if you make it, if you pin on those wings someday, remember, it's not about you. It's about everyone counting on you to show up when it matters. Sincerely, Captain Vera Kyan. She sent it. Never thought about it again. But 12 years later, a young woman would graduate flight school and carry that letter in her helmet bag. Would quote it during her first mission briefing. Would remember it when things got hard. Legacy, Vera would learn, wasn't built in moments. It was built in letters and lessons, and the example you set when you thought nobody was watching. But she didn't know that yet. She just knew she had a mission in the morning. A convoy needed escort through the Coringle. Simple, routine. The kind of mission she'd flown 100 times. She pre-flighted Hog 27 in the pre-dawn darkness, found the titanium plaque in the cockpit, and smiled. Then she climbed in and flew, because that's what you did. You flew. And you kept flying until you couldn't. And then you found a way to fly anyway. The mountains of Afghanistan spread below her like a crumpled carpet, and somewhere in those mountains, men who needed her were waiting. She'd be there. She was always there. That was what the sky meant, what the insignia on her shoulder meant, what her call sign meant. Warden, guardian, the one who shows up, the one who stays, the one who brings people home. Captain Vera Kyan flew west into the dawn, and the ancient A-10 beneath her hummed like a prayer. Old, scarred, unbreakable. Just like the woman at the controls. And somewhere far away, 12 men woke up to see their families, went to work, held their children, lived their lives, because one night when everyone else said impossible, someone disagreed and proved them wrong.